lecturing a little bit at the beginning here. We'll still have some conversations, but I want to get through this material about how we should kind of judge the morality of Pride and Prejudice, because it's not exactly, I don't know, it's not exactly aligned with how we usually think of marriage in 2021. Hang on, let me just erase all this Nazi stuff. And then we'll get to the love stuff. Okay. All right, so this book we talked about when I was introducing the book, we talked about it being in the Regency period, and the Regency period happened right after the Enlightenment, or like it's still during the Enlightenment, but the Enlightenment has had a big impact on how people are thinking at the time. And there was one big thinker that I think had become so important as a philosopher during this time that he was kind of infiltrating or like soaking into all of the major writing at the time, because people were just like, okay, this is how we want to think about knowledge and ethics now. So one of his big things is that you are born with certain categories of understanding. So certain categories of understanding. So like you're born into this world and you come out of the womb ready to know what time is and what space is, basically. So it's really basic categories of understanding. It's not like you're like born knowing what is right and wrong, or born knowing the Pythagorean theorem, nothing like that. But you kind of like, you have these categories set up in your brain. You know, he didn't get into this, but like maybe evolutionarily kind of set up into your brain to help you understand how the world works. And this is called a priori knowledge. Have you heard that term before, a priori? How many of you guys have taken Mr. Ball's class, his philosophy class? Mm-hmm. Okay, I was just curious if he talks about time. Oh, does Escocio do a philosophy class too? No. Oh, okay. All right, so let me ask this, because Pride and Prejudice is not about babies being born and what kind of knowledge they have out of the womb, right? But it is about how they exist in this kind of society. And we can think of the same way that Kant believes you're born into the world with certain kind of knowledge, we can think of the way that characters in this book are kind of born into this society with a certain expectation and knowledge. So tell me this, what kind of knowledge do you think Elizabeth has, and other characters in the novel, but what kind of knowledge does she have because she is born into this Regency upper class society? What kind of like expectations does she have? Yeah.
I think a big one is like manners, and especially like women at the time, like how they're supposed to like hold themselves and act.
Yeah, good. There are some of these like things, and you know, we would say she probably gained these through experience, not the way Kant says it. But if we're thinking of it as a kind of metaphor, she has these manners kind of set into place, right? And it's like they all kind of know what is expected of them as women in society. So like you don't run through the mud, and you don't read books while people are at cards, and you consider money to be your highest priority when it comes to marriage. You know, there are these certain rules. Is there anything else that Elizabeth is kind of born into knowing in this society? Yeah.
She's kind of born in knowing that she's not the highest class, like kind of a lower class in the hierarchy.
Good. So there's this kind of innate hierarchy in this society, right? And I say innate because it doesn't seem to be attached to how hard you work or what you do for a living. Like it is innate. You're born into wealth, and this wealth is yours until you die, and then it becomes someone else's. That's like the system of inheritance, right? So we could think of that as a priori. Yeah. Anything else that she's got before she is born into this society kind of idea? So her categories of understandings are about manners and gender. They are about hierarchy and society. What do you think the expectations, let's just be very clear about her sort of expectations for marriage in this society. What are the expectations for marriage? Yeah.
Well, society's expectations are that you marry rich, but like, even though she does seem to have that as an end goal, she like really values happiness and independence.
Yeah, good. So the marriage rules that she's born into are all about marrying rich, right? She has these ideas about like, I want happiness. I want to be an equal basically with my husband. Although the way they talk about equals is interesting, isn't it? At the end there, it's like, Mr. Bennet is like, you would not be happy unless you saw your husband as a superior, unless you saw him as like, you know, someone you can respect and sort of obey, because you want a marriage of equals. It's like, okay, that's not necessarily our vision of what equality is, right? I don't necessarily think of my husband as superior. In fact, I think of myself as superior. But that kind of like, that would be a better idea of equality, I think, than someone like Charlotte, who's just like, yeah, I don't respect him at all. He does his thing and I'll do my thing. I think when Mr. Bennet says equality, it's more about like the way you can communicate with each other and actually like say your ideas out loud and be understood by each other, right? Okay, so she has these kind of marriage rules that she's born into, but let's talk about whether or not she kind of like fits with those, right? So the reason that I think this book is about this kind of a priori knowledge is because that first sentence, which we talked about quite a lot one day, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And we get all three of these in that first sentence. We hear about the manners between men and women. Single men must want a wife, right? We get the hierarchy of society. He's a rich guy, and so he's going to want a wife. And then we get the marriage rules here too, that a man can't stay single if he's rich. He needs to pair up with someone. That's kind of his duty. So right from the very beginning, we get this idea that there are certain rules, and that those are kind of unchangeable rules. Like, it's not like when you're born into this world, you can just decide what you're going to think about time. Like, you could try, but it's stuck in your head. You can't experience time differently. Even if you're out of your mind like Darrell, you pretty much experience time as moving along. Maybe not, actually. Maybe Darrell doesn't. Anyway, don't want to get off track. And so then the thing we want to think about then is, can the society be changed? Tell me this. What does the narrator think? Does the narrator think that this society can be changed or even should be changed? Let me think about this. Oh yeah, Ellen.
I don't think that the narrator is necessarily like saying that all society is changed, because at the end of the book, Jane and Billy end up pretty happy together, and their time is a good example of conventional marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's more advocating for individualized change. You know, like it's not for everybody, but it's not necessarily a bad system itself.
Absolutely. So when I talk about the narrator kind of critiquing her society, I would say her, I'm not talking about her like overturning things and saying women need to be in charge in this way and men need to be in charge in this way, or men need to be subservient, or like, sometimes we'll read this book as a feminist novel, and I do think there's some feminist strains in it, but it's not so much that like it's critiquing the systems that are in place. I think the narrator is pretty okay with the rules. I don't think she steps in and says we need to overhaul these rules. And the reason I think so is what we talked about with entailment. Remember how the narrator is like, unfortunately, this was the case for entailment. And Mrs. Bennet rails against it. She's just like, oh, I hate it. Why is it's not fair? It should go to, it should go to my girls, la, 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 la. But the narrator really uses that as a joke and says, no, this is a priori. There's nothing you can do about it. So like, don't stress about it. This is just the way things are, right? So let's see. So to get back to Kant, he thinks we're born this way. And he says, I want to make sure I get this right. He says that if you try to rely too much on your experience, your reason to understand the world, you are not going to be able to understand that world. So don't rely completely on pure reason. So just because something ought to be a certain way does not mean that it is going to be a certain way. That's kind of what he's saying. It's like, you can think that men and women should be totally equal, right? In this world, but that doesn't mean that is going to be the case, and it doesn't mean that you can make it the case even, because he's saying these things are just a priori, you can't change them, right? So you can't reason them away. So again, it's like, just because Jane and Elizabeth really, like, they ought to inherit that property. If they're the kids of the property, then like, yes, it should go down through these generations, right? But it doesn't work that way. So it's kind of some things you just have to say, all right, I'm going to move on from that. So instead of just learning through our reason, we learn through a combination of experience and reason. So because we can't just reason away what ought to be, we also have to factor in our experience of the world. And that's where we get this idea of like, okay, when I experience these three things and it kind of works out for Jane and Bingley, like Ella said, then I can kind of like understand the way that marriage should work in my world. And that works with two ways. It can be done through our sensibility. Jane Austen has a book called Sense and Sensibility. Sensibility is what we feel. So we can understand the world through our feelings. We can say, this feels really bad, and so it is bad. Or this feels, I like the feel of this smooth thing. Now I understand that this board is smooth. Like, it's both physical feelings and emotional feelings. And this is a kind of like, Kant thought that this was a kind of passive understanding of the world. It's like you can't really help it. He wasn't into that whole, you have two wolves inside of you, choose which wolf you're gonna feel like or you're gonna feed, you know what I'm talking about, right? He didn't like jive with that. He was more like, you can't help your emotions. Like, you can't help what you touch and experience of the world. You can't help what you see, you know, it's just, these are your sensations. So it's kind of a passive way to understand the world. But he also felt like you understand the world then through your reasoning, through your understanding. And this is kind of what you think about things, right? So I could feel that this board is smooth, and then I don't know what, but I could think certain things about the property of the board, if I knew about science maybe, and then that would be my understanding kicking in. And he felt like this is active, that we can control this, and we can build it, and we can go to school and learn how to like kind of understand our world a little bit more. So I want to know, this book has people in it that operate according to their sensibility mostly, and it has books that operate according to their understanding mostly. Which do you think the book prefers? Or in the combination, how does the combination work, the relationship between those two work in the book? Yeah, Brooklyn.
I think especially with Elizabeth and her opinion of Darcy, like I think that switches a lot between sensibility and understanding, because like at first she just feels inclined to like hate him because and like, well, reasonably, like he's wealthy, so like she should, like it would make sense for her to like try and like him, but then it switches around and then she's like, she feels more emotionally inclined to be with him because of like his selflessness and like this other information. And so it's kind of, and like the reasoning kind of shifts like that. It's like, yeah, mixture.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're exactly right. So at the beginning, it's really reactionary. She's like, oh, he said I was kind of playing at the ball, you know. I don't want to dance with her because nobody else is going to dance with her, right? So it's this reaction like, okay, I hate you, you know? And then because of like her feelings for Wickham, then she's got all this prejudice at the beginning, like I'm more inclined to Wickham. And what she talks about with Wickham is he's charming and good looking. So I'm going to believe what he says, right? That is the opposite of reasonable. Like usually it's the charming, good looking ones that are the ones that you should not believe, right? Because they don't have to tell the truth. No, that's not true. But that, you know, it's not reasonable to trust someone based on your sensibility, on your what you see and feel, right? And yet she does. And because of that, she kind of abandons her understanding for a while and kind of sticks with this sensibility stuff. And then she sees Pemberley. Well, first, I mean, Darcy explains himself and she goes through this process of like, okay, I think I could believe that. I think I could like, I'm maybe becoming more inclined to him, right? But then she sees Pemberley, and she hears what the servants say about him, and she gets all of these witnesses that speak to his sort of like good character, and she sees all his good stuff, you know, and she starts thinking, what if I were the mistress of Pemberley? And suddenly that understanding starts to kick in. It's not that she abandons sensibility, but it's that her understanding informs her sensibility, right? So here she is like talking, you hear her throughout the book talking herself in to liking Darcy. And she's flattered by him, and she really likes that he's so persistent, you know. She's just like, yeah, I mean, he really likes me, and that is amazing because he is the richest person and the most eligible bachelor here, right? It doesn't mean that she doesn't like Darcy or that she won't be happy with Darcy, but it is this process of like talking yourself into liking him. So I think with Elizabeth, we're going to say that it kind of moves this direction, right? Although it's still, you still maintain the sensibility, she uses the understanding to kind of control her sensibility. Yeah, Daylin.
What about when she gets Darcy's letter?
Yeah, what about that?
Like, obviously, like, upsets her. Like, does it go backwards?
So I think that this all happens after Darcy's letter. That's what I think. I think up until then, like, she's hating Darcy, right? And she's like, even when he comes to propose, she's like, no, you know? And then she gets the letter, and I think that's when the understanding starts to kick in. And then when she sees Pemberley, she uses the letter to justify these new feelings for him. That makes sense? That's what I think. And then I think until the end, they talk about emotions the whole time. In fact, let's look at that part. But they don't actually, well, they talk about their emotions all the time, but it's in this like kind of reasonable way. So go to so it's volume 3, chapter 16, that's an XVI. But if you have numbered chapters, it's 58. So it's just a couple chapters from the very end. I think the book has 61, yeah. Okay, so this is like the proposal kind of part. So it's right into chapter 16, and it says, if you will thank me, is the beginning of it.
331.
Thank you. 331 in the school copies. So it says, if you will thank me, he replied, let it be for yourself alone. This is him talking about Wickham, paying off Wickham. That the wish of giving happiness to you might add force to the other inducements which led me on. I shall not attempt to deny, but your family owe me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. Elizabeth was too much embarrassed to say a word. After a short pause, her companion added, you are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever. So he's like so open right here, right? And Elizabeth, feeling all the more than common awkwardness and anxiety of his situation, now forced herself to speak, and immediately, though not very fluently, gave him to understand that her sentiments had undergone a material change since the period to which he alluded as to make her receive with gratitude and pleasure his present assurances. The happiness which this reply produced was such as he had probably never felt before, and he expressed himself on the occasion as sensibly and as warmly as a man violently in love can be supposed to do. Had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eyes, she might have seen how well the expression of heartfelt delight diffused over his face became him. But though she could not look, she could listen, and he told her of feelings which, in proving of what importance she was to him, made his affection every moment more valuable. So if you were to say what kind of understanding is the more prominent there, is it sensibility or understanding? I think it's sensibility here in this section. Yes, you're right, Kaylee. But you hear, like, listen to all the ways it's like the happiness, he's sensibly and warmly and violently in love. I think the violently in love suggests a kind of like out of control nature to it, right? That passivity. Yeah, Ella?
Is she by saying that, why is she saying that Elizabeth can't look? Are they like embracing or something?
No, I think that Elizabeth is like too embarrassed, like to.
Yeah, she's like, I was
just
gonna
like,
say, like, that would make it sensibility because it's
more like a physical, like sort of tactile.
That's true, but I don't think it is. I think she's just sort of like, I can't even look at you right now. This is too embarrassing of a moment, you know. One of these. Did that make you cringe? Yeah, really.
I do feel like it's kind of a different kind of sensibility.
Yes.
Because the first proposal, Darcy was telling her that he was overcome with emotions, but he didn't have this understanding of what she wanted.
Yes.
He was just going on and on about how the family was awful and like he'll still love her despite that. But at this point, it's like it's still sensibility, but it's like I don't know. There's more of a I don't know. There's just more understanding there, I guess.
Yes, I think it's because Darcy's kind of moving the other direction. I think Darcy started with all this understanding because in that first letter, he is just like, I feel these things and I really don't want to feel them and I'm going to try and reason them away, but I have to say it because that's my way to control my feelings, you know, like he's just very like, I hate your family, but I like you. I wish it didn't, but I do like you, you know? So it's like he's like struggling against his sensibility. And then he moves in this end and he kind of goes into this like, I am violently in love with you. That doesn't sound great. Sorry. It's I have heartfelt delight and feelings and affection for you. It's all emotions, right? But then look at how Elizabeth talks about it on the next page. So find the paragraph that starts, I cannot give you credit. All right, and in the middle of that, actually, we'll just read that whole paragraph. It says, I cannot give you credit for any philosophy of the kind. Your retrospections must be so totally void of reproach. Wait, is this Elizabeth or Darcy talking? I thought it was Elizabeth. No, it's Darcy, huh? Yes, it's Darcy, sorry. This is where Darcy is talking about how his understanding is fitting in with his sensibility. That's what it is. So move into, I have been a selfish being all my life. He says, I have been a selfish being all my life in practice, though not in principle. As a child, I was taught what was right, but not taught to correct my temper. I was given good principles, but left to follow them in pride and conceit. Unfortunately, an only son for many years, an only child, I was spoiled by my parents who, though good themselves, my father particularly, all that was benevolent and amiable, allowed, encouraged, almost taught me to be selfish and overbearing, to care for none beyond my own family circle, to think meanly of all the rest of the world, to wish at least to think meanly of their sense and worth compared to my own. Such I was from 8 to 28, and such I might still have been, but for you, dearest, loveliest Elizabeth. What do I not owe you? You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you, I was properly humbled. I came to you without a doubt of my reception. You showed me how insufficient were all my pretensions to please a woman worthy of being pleased. I think this kind of goes to what Emberly was talking about there. It's like he starts with this idea, this understanding of morality. I should treat people this way, but his sensibility is like still like very passive. But through like kind of experiencing good emotions with Elizabeth, he's found this nice balance. There we go, between the two. So I think they kind of like even out. I wanted to find the section where Elizabeth is talking about how, it's her dad talking about how like kind of reasonable this partnership is. So I'm just going to read you this part. He says, Lizzie, I know that you could be neither happy nor respectable unless you truly esteemed your husband, unless you looked up to him as a superior. Your lively talents would place you in the greatest danger in an unequal marriage. You could scarce escape discredit and misery. My child, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life. You know not what you are about. So in that section, I think is where we're getting Mr. Bennet's idea that Elizabeth has grown reasonable and has made now a reasonable match rather than just the sensible match that would be with Wickham. The sensible match that Lydia made. Okay, so then I want to go into the ethics here. This is how we like understand the world, and they're learning to understand the world this way. Kant felt like there's a way to understand the world that is ethical. So what he thought was, let's see, here we go. Number 3, ethics. Okay. What he thought was that even though we can use sensibility to kind of like understand the world, we kind of need to just stick with rationality when we are making ethical decisions. So we use reason to determine the right thing to do. And this he called duty. This is your duty to do this thing. And because we understand the world through experiences and through sensibilities, we can't know for sure what our duty is, but we have to act at some point. Like, even though you don't know for sure what the right choice is, you have to do something. You have to make a choice. And so you have to kind of like figure out what kind of choice you're going to make. And because it's like the process of figuring that out that makes the right choice, then our ethical understanding, when we make moral choices, we need to make them reasonably and rationally, not based on our emotions. And the reason for this is like he had this, so he wanted to ask, like, is this possible? Can we make choices without emotions? And he didn't think we necessarily could, but he thought it was our responsibility. I won't use duty again. It's our responsibility to try. All right, so that makes me question whether or not this book is, then believes in this idea of Kantian morality, we would say. So do you think that this book believes that, well, let me jump here because I think we said it with Elizabeth and Darcy. Which characters does this book use to critique someone who would make decisions fully on emotion? Lydia for sure, right? Lydia is like, I never know how to talk about Lydia without being a little bit crude, but she like just wants a man, like she just thinks he's hot and she wants to go away with him. And she wants to get married. She goes off thinking they're gonna get married, right? But is she that disturbed when they don't? Not necessarily, and it just was good fortune that they ended up getting married, and now she's happy. And she also bases this on the emotion of like pride, where she's just like, now I'm the first sister that's married, and I'm the youngest, and all the rest of you guys are not married, and how sad is that for you? It's like this this kind of like spiteful type idea. So it's like lust, there's the word for it that's not crude, lust mixed with spitefulness. And that's Lydia, but I think there's another character in here that's criticized a little bit for making all emotional decisions. I think, this is like a guess what I'm thinking, I think it's Jane. I think this book is critical of Jane. Can you justify that for me so I don't have to? Why do you think this book might be critical of Jane? Okay.
Jane is like super, not naive, but like she's super nice to everyone, and like I feel like instead of like basing her decisions on like actual like brain stuff, she's just kind of like, oh well, how would I feel if someone treated me bad?
Yeah.
And she just kind of does do that.
Good. It's like almost completely based on empathy.
Yeah.
I want to understand you and where you're coming from. Ali Rose?
I think it's funny how like the author is Jane and the character she writes as like stupid is Jane. And so I think it's like a
But she's also like the most beautiful one.
Yeah.
She really said,
She's like, I will give you my name.
kind person in the entire book. What shall I call her? Jane.
Okay, this is fascinating though, because what is an author's job? It is to understand where everyone's coming from and try to be sympathetic to where they're coming from. They always say in writing workshops, if you hate any of your characters, then you're not going to write a good novel. You even have to love your villains and sort of understand their journey. And Jane totally does that. So I've literally never connected that her name is Jane and the character's name is Jane.
Why do you think Jane is rewarded at the end of the novel?
That's a good point. So if it's
that's my thing.
Yeah.
I almost don't know if I don't know. I think that she's kind of making logical decisions within the system she exists in.
Yeah.
I would argue that she's a little bit less driven by emotion. Or at least like I think she's highly empathetic in a lot of ways. It does make her kind of naive.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have like a Lydia moment or even like an Elizabeth moment really. Like
Yeah.
she gets like kind of hurt in a way a little bit by Bingley, but then like it works out great for her. Like I don't know.
That's a great
And
point.
she's a really static character. She doesn't really
She doesn't change
So
it
I don't
all
know
throughout it, yeah.
Why would the book, like, I'm just curious, why would the book reward her if she didn't change?
Let's think about that more. I'm gonna show us a passage and think about it. Yeah, Dale.
I read that, not in the book, but online, that the author had a similar experience.
To Jane?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
interesting.
she was engaged to a guy who was like her neighbor or something,
Uh-huh.
and his parents like threw it off because she didn't have as much money as him.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then, so I feel like she kind of named the character her name, and then gave herself the happy ending she wanted.
It's kind of fan fiction about herself then, right? So it's like I want to write my fantasy into this novel at the same time. That's fascinating. I do want to look at see maybe one way that the book it doesn't necessarily punish Jane, but it does point out what's dangerous about Jane's position. So go to volume 3, chapter 7. That's a VII.
I actually needed that.
Yeah, I've never ever learned.
You didn't have to do that in elementary school?
I think we did, I just didn't learn it.
I only learned up to, I don't know what the one for 50 is.
This is really embarrassing. I can't really tell circle time.
Oh, me neither.
I hate that I call it circle time because it sounds so like literally elementary. But
Analog time.
I was absent the entire week when I learned about clocks.
Serious?
Can you not tell time on this thing?
No.
I
really
can,
do
but it
this.
takes a while.
Yeah.
It takes. I gotta count.
Yeah, I have to like.
This is insane to me, really. I feel like we spent like a month on time in elementary school. It's like all we did.
I was
Years
years
ago,
ago.
You had to be tutored for that.
I had moved from Canada to the US, and so I missed a few things, and one of them was fun times. I got there, and like they were finishing up their time unit, and I had no clue, and so the teacher had to like sit down with me and teach me.
See, that's a good reason.
That's a good teacher.
They would give us the little clocks and I'd be too busy like playing with the things. I'm like moving them around.
Well, and look how successful you all are. So it doesn't matter, I guess. Yeah. Oh, everybody wants to. Well, if you want a unit about how to tell time after the AP test, I can maybe teach you. I've never done it before, but I do know how.
I also can't count money.
Oh, what? Money sucks.
Interesting. Okay, let's get back to Jane here. Maybe that's why you're so sympathetic to Jane. She is an emotional type. Well, not emotional. What is it? A little bit clueless about material things. So, are you at chapter 7 of volume 3? Okay, it's a couple pages in, and the paragraph we're going to look at starts. I comfort myself with thinking. And I absolutely agree with Ella. Jane is more rational than she kind of lets on to people. And you can tell by the way she says this. I comfort myself with thinking, replied Jane, that he certainly would not marry Lydia if he had not a real regard for her. Though our kind uncle has done something towards clearing him, I cannot believe that 10,000 pounds or anything like it has been advanced. He has children of his own and may have more. How could he spare half 10,000 pounds? So look a little bit later too, where it says, Jane says, we must endeavor to forget all that is passed on either side, said Jane. I hope and trust they will yet be happy. His consenting to marry her is a proof, I will believe, that he has come to a right way of thinking. Their mutual affection will steady them, and I flatter myself they will settle so quietly and live in so rational a manner as may in time make their past imprudence forgotten. And Elizabeth says, their conduct has been such as neither you nor I nor anybody can ever forget. It is useless to talk of it. So Jane is the language that she uses, and she uses this throughout any instance that is like difficult for her to like deal with emotionally. She uses this kind of language. What kind of language is she using to kind of like hedge or set herself apart from what she says she's thinking? Yeah, Kylie.
She kind of said, or like, she kind of talks about how like, oh, no one can know like what their intentions were.
Yeah, good. She's like, I can't know what the intentions were, right? And so I'm going to comfort myself with believing certain things about it, you know? So it's like, it's not clear whether she actually believes that they will be happy, but she says, I hope and trust that they will be happy. It's like she is intentionally placing her faith in the good nature of other people. Yeah.
And it is like, even she talks about rationality a lot, like it's a very methodical way of separating yourself from the situation. Like,
Yeah.
she very intentionally compartmentalizes in a way that I think is really
Yes, exactly. She's like, I know that I have been born into this, and so I am going to think this way. And it does seem very rational, and yet she has this kind of like, she rationally chooses the emotional side of things, right? And this gets her into trouble just once that I can think of, and it is when when Elizabeth and Jane are talking about whether they should tell everyone about Wickham, right? And I wish I had that page number, and I don't. They're all they're both sitting here, and they're like, okay, we know this thing about Wickham now. We know that he's like run off with Georgiana. We know that he's deeply in debt, and like he was the one who did wrong, and not Darcy, et cetera, et cetera. Should we tell everyone? And Jane says, I don't see the use of it. I think that we should just trust that everyone else is going to make the right choices. I think that he has had a hard enough time of it already, so why make him like a pariah in the community? And I think he's just gonna go away and we're gonna be fine. So by Jane placing her trust in the good nature of people, she doesn't stop something. And Elizabeth agrees, so it's Elizabeth, is not innocent in this, but she doesn't stop something that could have been stopped before Lydia went off with Mr. Wickham, right? So she does get that happy ending. I don't think she's like punished for this, but there are ways that the behavior is not completely ethical, as she like intentionally tries to obfuscate, change the truth of the situation. Yeah. Okay, so that's the characters that are more emotional. Which person in this book gets criticized because they are far too rational? Yeah.
I think that Charlotte's one of them.
Yeah. Charlotte is going to live this life with somebody who this book has been very clear is awful, just awful. And she's like, that's just the way that I want it to happen, right? She says, okay, let's find this section. Actually, I want you to look at it. Volume 2, Chapter 1. They're going to say when they find it, right?
Oh, I found it.
Oh, what page is it?
121.
121. Good. Okay, and Charlotte says, "My dear Lizzie," do you see this chapter? It's like maybe a page in. See this paragraph, I mean. "My dear Lizzie, do not give way to such feelings as these." Basically, Lizzie's like, I hate this guy. If you marry him, I am never going to come see you. She says, "Do not give way to such feelings as these. They will ruin your happiness. You do not make allowances enough for difference of situation and temper. Consider Mr. Collins' respectability." And Charlotte's, oh wait, this isn't Charlotte talking. It's Jane. Oh shoot, I didn't find the right thing. Oh well, you make enough allowance for a different situation and temper. Consider Mr. Collins' respectability and Charlotte's prudent, steady character. Remember that she is one of a large family, that as to fortune, it is a most eligible match, and be ready to believe, that's Jane again, right? Be ready to believe, for everybody's sake, that she may feel something like regard and esteem for our cousin. It's filtered through Jane, but I do think that represents Charlotte's point of view here, which is like, he's from a good family, he has a good situation, I have a large family, I'm gonna marry this guy. So what's wrong with what Charlotte does? Like, isn't that kind of what society has set them up for? Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me, like, do you think that the book is saying that there's anything like innately wrong with Lydia and Wilson's relationship?
I do, because I think it ruins other people.
Yeah, because just for this one, it almost seems like the book is sort of criticizing Elizabeth and saying, like, don't judge people's internal dynamics.
Oh, with
I don't
Charlotte.
know.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe it's like, did this relationship really hurt anyone?
Yeah.
The Charlotte and Mr. Collins relationship. And I think that's a really good segue, and I've got to move along because you guys are going to do this timed right, into what I think this book says is the moral thing. And it's called the categorical imperative. This is a good, like, good word to throw around if you're trying to impress people. Categorical imperative. That is the Kantian ethical system. And basically it's the golden rule. It's kind of the golden rule because it's not individual. The golden rule is like do unto others as you would like to be done to you, right? But Kantian's golden rule is do unto others in a way that you would be comfortable if every single person in the world also did that thing. So it's completely rational because if you were to say, well, I am starving and my family is starving and so I need to steal this loaf of bread. I'm reading Les Mis right now. I need to steal this loaf of bread so that I can feed my family. Well, is that ethical? Under the Kantian system, no, because if everybody stole a loaf of bread, if everyone stole bread all the time, then the market would crash, right? And you can't sustain that system. It's not ethical because just because you have this particular situation doesn't mean that everybody else can do the thing. And so under this system of morality, it's kind of saying if you marry someone for a certain reason, you need to be comfortable with everyone marrying a man for that same reason. So that it's like, it is, I think it's a cool kind of idea, although I don't necessarily agree with it because of equity and that kind of thing. Like you want to give people certain allowances based on their experiences, but it's like marriage isn't an emotional choice, it's an ethical choice because you live in a community and it's a hierarchy and there are rules. And if you break those rules, are you going to be comfortable with everyone else breaking those rules? And that's where I get to Lydia. It's like, would you be comfortable in this society if everyone went out and just not married, but just like ran away with people? And they wouldn't be, and Jane Austen wouldn't be, even if we, who cares, but, but they wouldn't be, right? And so like, I think it's like you erase all the differences between people, and then you can't treat people based on what Kant called their means. Like you can't make decisions based on, I'm gonna feel great if I do this thing tomorrow. You have to make decisions based on the end result. And if all of your decisions are based on this end result of like marrying well and fitting into this a priori understanding, then you're doing the right thing. And if we look at it, I do think Jane ends up doing the right thing, right? Although she made a choice along the way that I don't think was Kantian ethics, because if everyone hid all information about who was like a scoundrel in society would crumble, But in the end, Elizabeth and Darcy, they make this choice that I think we'd all be comfortable, or they would all be comfortable with people making that choice. So the marriage is like completely ethical rather than reasonable and rather than emotional. Does that make sense? A little bit? Okay, that was my lecture. That's my Pride and Prejudice lecture. We're going to take this test. Oh, I called it a test. I don't like doing that. We're going to do this timed right. That makes it feel better, right?
For which you are graded.
For which I am grading.
You can rewrite, but it's not a test.
No.
I actually like doing time right.
You like with the 19.
You like doing that?
I like it in class more. And how he.
Yeah, I like
it. And how he's super smart.
Very
How his parents are.
Don't forget, so let me get that.
Okay, okay. And how his parents, sure. No, I think you should.
Dylan, have you done one of these before?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I have.
I think you should.
Oh, I got my job.
You should work in my place. It pays $11 to $50.
Kylie, I have yours online, so I'm going to open it up for you here in a second. And you can just do it right now and get it done. Okay. It feels great for Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I think so too.
To embrace the pain. Okay, this prompt did not originally have Pride and Prejudice on it, but
We're gonna pretend it's Pride and Prejudice.
yes, I wrote it on it.
Okay.
And you're going to write about Pride and Prejudice. Because on the test, you can choose whichever book that you want to write about, even if it's not included in the list.
The ABC book. Read that again.
Should we have to?
Just in case, because we're being optimistic.
Oh, Dr. Bora.
Yes.
I'm watching a show on HBO Max, and it talks about Crime and Punishment a lot.
Oh, what is it?
It's called The Flight Attendant.
It's a murder.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
It's got one of the girls from Big Bang Theory.
Oh, that makes me less
No,
less excited.
It's not funny at all. It's not funny at all. It's like,
Okay,
like,
is it Penny from Big Bang Theory?
I don't know.
I like that you don't know. Okay.
Dr. Laura,
Yeah.
like, is Moby Dick, like, you know how Private Punishment was like, rather this home ago going to, like, insane?
Uh-huh.
Is Moby Dick the same way? Because I read it when I was like 10, so.
Yes, but it's not from the point of view of the insane person. Like we are, it's first person from somebody who is sane watching someone go insane. Yeah.
Wait, Moby Dick is the one about the whale, right?
Yeah.
The whale.
It was
This is fun. For a long time, our district blocked searches for Moby Dick. I had to fight them so hard. I was like, can we please? Anyway. Okay, so